Hotel rejects black woman, but she shocks everyone when she returns as the owner. What would you do if the very place meant to welcome you slammed the door in your face? Not because you didn't belong, but because they couldn't see past their own assumptions. This isn't just a story about a hotel or a reservation. It's about power, resilience, and the sweet taste of justice. And it all begins on a cold winter night when a woman named Elena Morgan walked into a place that had no idea who they were about to turn away. The heavy doors of the Four Seasons Hotel swung open with practiced precision, revealing the grand lobby within. The space was a symphony of opulence. Marble floors polished to a mirror finish, chandeliers dripping with crystal teardrops, and an air of exclusivity that clung to every corner. Elena Morgan stood at the threshold, taking in the scene with quiet observation. Her suitcase, sleek and understated, rested by her side, a stark contrast to the towering trunks of luggage hauled in by other guests. Elena had been here before, not at this particular hotel, but in places like it, spaces that whispered of affluence while casting glances at those who didn't look the part. Today, she had dressed for comfort after a grueling transatlantic flight, fitted black jeans, a tailored white blouse, and a pair of leather flats. Her long braids, neatly tied back, framed a face that betrayed neither her exhaustion nor her irritation. She was here to rest, not to prove herself. The receptionist behind the marble desk barely glanced up as she approached. Paul, as his gold nameplate read, was engrossed in tapping away at his computer. His uniform, pristine and pressed, spoke of meticulous attention to detail, but his demeanor radiated something entirely different, disinterest tinged with mild condescension. "Good evening," Elena began, her voice calm yet firm. She placed her ID and credit card on the counter. "I have a reservation under the name Elena Morgan, Penthouse Suite." Paul finally looked up, his eyes scanning her face before dropping to her clothes. His expression faltered for the briefest moment, and then it returned to a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "One moment, Ms. Morgan," he said, his fingers moving over the keyboard with exaggerated slowness. His eyes flickered to the screen, then back to Elena. "I'm sorry, but I'm not seeing a reservation under that name." Elena blinked, her brows knitting together. "That's not possible. I booked directly through the hotel website weeks ago. Perhaps you could check again?" Paul's smile tightened. "I can assure you, Ms. Morgan, I've checked thoroughly. Unfortunately, the penthouse is unavailable. Perhaps there was an error in the system?" Elena's fingers tapped lightly on the counter. She knew this routine, the subtle deflection, the rehearsed politeness masking something uglier beneath. Still, she gave him the benefit of the doubt. "Fine. If the penthouse isn't available, can you find me an alternative room? Something comparable." Paul hesitated, his gaze dropping briefly to her suitcase. "We do have some standard rooms available," he said slowly, "but I must inform you, they're quite costly." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. "Cost is not an issue." The receptionist's smile wavered as though he didn't believe her. His eyes swept over her again, from her braids to her flats, before he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Perhaps I could recommend a more affordable option? There's a motel nearby that might better suit your needs." The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. Around them, other guests moved about, couples in evening wear, businessmen with expensive watches, but no one seemed to notice the quiet insult that had just been delivered. Elena straightened, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, did you just suggest I stay at a motel?" Paul's practiced demeanor cracked ever so slightly. "I didn't mean to offend, Ms. Morgan. It's just, our penthouse guests typically arrive with prior arrangements, and you." "And I what?" Elena interrupted, her voice calm but sharp. "Don't look like I belong." Paul's cheeks flushed a faint pink. He glanced at the line forming behind her and made a show of checking the computer again. "As I said, the penthouse is unavailable. Security will assist you in finding suitable accommodations if needed." Elena felt the weight of eyes on her. A few guests had paused to watch the interaction, their curiosity barely concealed. She inhaled deeply, reeling in the sharp retort, threatening to escape. "That won't be necessary," she said finally, her tone measured. She leaned forward, locking eyes with Paul. "I'll remember this moment. Enjoy the rest of your evening." Without waiting for a response, she turned on her heel, her suitcase rolling behind her with a quiet hum. The murmurs of the lobby followed her as she stepped into the cool evening air. The city was alive with its usual chaos. horns blaring, street vendors calling out to passers-by, and the occasional laughter drifting from nearby restaurants. Elena walked a few steps away from the hotel entrance and stopped under a street lamp. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for. Thomas Evans, real estate advisor. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she hesitated. A memory surfaced, her father's voice, deep and steady, echoing a lesson he drilled into her since childhood. Dignity is the best revenge, Elena. Never forget that. A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. She pressed the button, and the call connected. Thomas, it's Elena. I need you to look into something for me. How much would it cost to buy a hotel chain? Start with Four Seasons. The line was silent for a moment before Thomas responded, his voice laced with curiosity. Elena? Are you serious? Her smile widened. Dead serious. As she ended the call, Elena glanced back at the hotel. The golden letters of its name gleamed against the night sky, a symbol of prestige and power. For now, let's see how long that lasts, she murmured, disappearing into the crowd. Elena sat in the back seat of the black town car that whisked her away from the Four Seasons Hotel, the city's glittering skyline passing by in fragmented reflections on the car windows. The quiet hum of the vehicle offered a sharp contrast to the cacophony of her thoughts. She stared at her phone, the last call still fresh on the screen. Thomas had promised to assemble preliminary figures by morning, but the weight of the decision she just made hung in the air. This wasn't just about owning a hotel. It was about sending a message to everyone who underestimated her, everyone who saw her skin color before her accomplishments, and everyone who believed she didn't belong in their world. As the car turned onto a quieter street, Elena finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She leaned her head back against the plush leather seat, her fingers tracing the edge of her phone. Memories bubbled to the surface, unbidden and vivid. She was 13 again, standing in a crowded store with her mother. The woman behind the counter was watching them, not discreetly, but openly, her eyes narrowing as though they didn't belong there. Elena remembered her mother's hand gripping her shoulder, a silent reassurance to stay calm. Excuse me, her mother had said politely, placing a pair of shoes on the counter. I'd like to try these in a size 8. The clerk didn't move. She folded her arms across her chest and gave them a once-over, her lips curling into a thin smile. Are you sure? These are expensive. Elena had never forgotten the way her mother had stood tall, her voice unwavering as she replied, I didn't ask for your opinion. I asked for the shoes. The shoes had been placed on the counter begrudgingly, but the damage was done. That was the day Elena learned how the world saw her, not as a girl with dreams or potential, but as someone who didn't belong in certain spaces. It was also the day she vowed to prove them wrong. Elena blinked, the memory fading as the car came to a gentle stop in front of her brownstone. She stepped out, the cool night air brushing against her skin as she climbed the steps to her front door. Inside, the familiar warmth of her home greeted her, sleek, modern furniture balanced by personal touches like family photos and a well-used bookshelf. Her assistant, Rachel G., was waiting for her in the kitchen, a mug of tea already in hand. Rachel G., a petite woman with a sharp mind and a knack for anticipating Elena's needs, raised an eyebrow as her boss entered. You're back earlier than expected, Rachel G. said, sliding the tea across the counter. How was the Four Seasons? Elena gave a dry laugh, shrugging off her coat. Enlightening. Rachel G.'s brow furrowed as she caught the edge in Elena's voice. What happened? Elena sat down at the kitchen island, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. For a moment, she debated brushing it off, but Rachel G. had been with her long enough to recognize when something wasn't right. They refused me the penthouse, Elena said simply, then suggested I find a room at a motel. Rachel G.'s jaw dropped. You're kidding. I wish I were. Elena recounted the encounter in the lobby, her voice calm but laced with a quiet intensity. As she spoke, Rachel G.'s expression shifted from disbelief to anger. And you just walked out? Rachel G. asked, her voice tinged with incredulity. For now, Elena replied, her lips curling into a small, knowing smile. But I made a call to Thomas. Elena nodded. I'm going to buy the Four Seasons. Not just the New York location, the whole chain. And when I do, I'm going to make sure no one else has to deal with what I dealt with tonight. Rachel G. leaned back in her chair, her eyes wide. That's bold, even for you. Elena's smile deepened. Bold is what got me here. The next morning, Elena was up before dawn. Her kitchen table was covered in documents and spreadsheets as Thomas's team sent over the first wave of research. Rachel G. flitted in and out, keeping the coffee flowing and organizing files as they came in. Thomas arrived in person shortly after 7 a.m., a portfolio tucked under his arm. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and the air of someone who thrived under pressure. "You weren't kidding about this," he said, setting the portfolio down in front of her. "The Four Seasons chain has been in talks for acquisition for months now. Their profits have been declining, and they're looking for new leadership to revitalize the brand. If you're serious, this is the perfect time." Elena flipped through the pages, her sharp eyes scanning the figures. "What's the asking price?" Thomas hesitated. "It's not cheap. You're looking at a multi-billion-dollar investment." Elena didn't blink. "Can I afford it?" "You can," Thomas said carefully, "but it'll be one of your largest ventures to date. This isn't just buying a company. It's restructuring an empire." Elena closed the portfolio and leaned back in her chair, her mind already racing. "Good. Let's move forward." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Just like that." "Just like that," Elena said firmly. "The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner." As Thomas and Rachel G. worked out logistics, Elena's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Ms. Morgan," a male voice said on the other end. "My name is Arthur Miller. I used to work as an accountant for the Four Seasons." Elena's brows furrowed. "How did you get this number?" "Through a mutual contact," Arthur said quickly. "I don't mean to intrude, but I heard you might be looking into the hotel chain. I have information you'll want to know." "What kind of information?" "Let's just say the management team hasn't been entirely honest about why the chain is struggling. There's been financial misconduct." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Go on." "I'd rather discuss this in person," Arthur said. "If you're interested, I'll send you the details." Elena ended the call, her mind already shifting gears. This wasn't just about buying a hotel anymore. It was about uncovering something bigger. As the morning sun poured into the room, Elena felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Four Seasons had underestimated her once. They wouldn't get the chance to do it again. Elena adjusted her scarf against the sharp bite of the winter wind as she stepped into a quiet cafe tucked between towering office buildings. The hum of conversation and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped her as she scanned the room. In a corner booth, a man sat nervously, his shoulders hunched, his hands gripping a steaming mug of coffee as if it were a lifeline. "Arthur Miller?" Elena's heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she approached. The man looked up, his eyes wide with recognition. He scrambled to his feet, offering a hand that trembled ever so slightly. "Ms. Morgan," he said, his voice low but earnest. "Thank you for meeting me." Elena took his hand in a firm grip. "Call me Elena. And let's skip the formalities. I'm curious to hear what you have to say." They sat across from each other, the table a small island of privacy in the bustling cafe. Elena studied him for a moment. Arthur was in his mid-40s, his suit rumpled and his face drawn with lines that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. He looked like a man carrying the weight of something heavy. Arthur exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping to the table. "I worked for the Four Seasons as an accountant for 8 years, he began, his voice steadying but quiet. "I started at the New York location, then moved up to regional management. Everything seemed fine at first, standard operations, solid revenue streams. But about 3 years ago, I started noticing discrepancies." Elena leaned in slightly, her expression unreadable. "What kind of discrepancies?" "At first, it was small things," Arthur said. "Unexplained expenses, invoices that didn't quite add up. I flagged them, but every time I brought it up to the higher-ups, they brushed me off. Then the numbers got bigger, large sums being funneled into shell companies, false reports to investors. It was systematic. Someone high up was siphoning money, and they were covering their tracks." Elena's jaw tightened. "And you have proof?" Arthur nodded, pulling a thin folder from his briefcase. He slid it across the table. "This is just a fraction of what I gathered before I left. I confronted the regional manager about it last year, and 3 days later, I was fired for performance issues. They threatened to sue me if I went public. I've been trying to figure out what to do ever since." Elena opened the folder and flipped through its contents. The documents were meticulous, financial statements with highlighted inconsistencies, emails that hinted at unauthorized transfers, and a timeline of events that painted a damning picture. "You're telling me this now because?" she asked, her tone calm but probing. Arthur hesitated, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his mug. Because I heard you're planning to buy the chain. If you're serious, you need to know what you're walking into. The corruption runs deep, and whoever's behind it won't go down without a fight. Elena closed the folder and met Arthur's gaze. Why didn't you take this to the authorities? I tried, Arthur admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. But without the full picture, it's my word against theirs. These people are powerful, Elena. They can bury evidence, ruin reputations. I needed someone with the resources to take them on. Elena leaned back, her mind working through the implications. This wasn't just about buying a struggling hotel chain anymore. This was about dismantling a network of greed and exploitation. It was about accountability. You did the right thing by coming to me, she said finally. But if we're going to take this on, we need more than this. Can you get the rest of the evidence? Arthur hesitated, then nodded. I still have contacts in the company. If you're serious about exposing them, I'll help. Elena's lips curved into a small, determined smile. Oh, I'm serious. And when I take this on, I don't lose. Back in her brownstone, Elena laid the folder on the table, the pages spread out like pieces of a puzzle. Rachel G. sat across from her, sipping a cup of tea as she listened to Elena recount her meeting with Arthur. This changes everything, Rachel G. said, her brow furrowed. If what he's saying is true, buying the Four Seasons won't just be a business move. It'll be a full-blown takedown. That's exactly what it needs to be, Elena replied, her voice firm. This isn't just about owning a hotel chain anymore. It's about setting a precedent. Rachel G. nodded slowly, her mind already working through logistics. We'll need a strategy. If the higher-ups catch wind of this, they'll try to block the sale or worse. Elena's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. Thomas had sent over another round of documents, this time detailing the chain's ownership structure and recent financial performance. She opened the email and skimmed its contents, her eyes narrowing as a pattern began to emerge. Rachel, she said, her voice sharp with realization. Look at this. The same shell companies Arthur mentioned, they show up in these reports too. It's all connected. Rachel G. leaned over, her eyes scanning the screen. It's like a web, she said. If we pull the wrong thread, the whole thing could collapse. Then we'll pull the right one, Elena said, her tone resolute. She closed the laptop and stood, her gaze steely. Get Thomas on the phone. We're moving forward. That night, as the city settled into its usual rhythm, Elena stood by the window of her bedroom, staring out at the skyline. The lights of New York glittered like 1,000 tiny promises, and she felt the weight of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Dignity is the best revenge. She smiled faintly, her reflection in the glass a picture of quiet determination. The Four Seasons had made a mistake when they dismissed her. Now, she would make them remember her name. And this time, she wouldn't be walking through their doors as a guest. She'd be walking in as their owner. Elena woke to the soft pre-dawn glow creeping through her bedroom windows. The stillness of the city at this hour felt like a rare gift, a pause before the chaos of the day. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and sat for a moment, grounding herself in the quiet. Today wasn't just another day. Today, the wheels she'd set in motion would start turning in earnest. Downstairs, the brownstone was already alive with activity. Rachel G., ever the early riser, had commandeered the dining table, her laptop and notebook spread out in organized chaos. A fresh pot of coffee brewed in the kitchen, the aroma filling the air. Elena joined her, tying her robe tighter around her as she sat. What's the latest? She asked, reaching for the steaming cup Rachel G. had already poured for her. Rachel G. pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose and handed over a sheet of notes. I've been cross-referencing the financial data Arthur provided with the records Thomas sent over. There's a pattern. Payments funneled into 3 specific shell companies, all registered under aliases. But here's the kicker. One of those companies is linked to the current regional director of the Four Seasons. Elena arched an eyebrow. The regional director? As in, the same person who oversees the New York property. Exactly, Rachel G. confirmed. His name is Victor Harrison. He's been with the company for over a decade, but his name keeps popping up in connection with these questionable transactions. Elena leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers against the table. If Harrison is involved, he's not working alone. Someone higher up must be protecting him. Rachel G nodded. That's likely, but we'll need concrete evidence to take him down and to ensure the sale goes through without interference. Elena sipped her coffee, her mind already racing. Arthur mentioned he still has contacts within the company. If we can get him to dig deeper, we might be able to expose the entire operation. Rachel G hesitated. Do you trust him? Elena set her cup down, her gaze steady. Not completely, but for now, he is the only insider we have. And if his story checks out, he'll be invaluable. Later that morning, Elena met with Thomas and Arthur in a private conference room at her legal team's office. The room was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a sweeping view of the city. Arthur looked less nervous than he had during their first meeting, but there was still a tension in his posture, a man walking a tightrope, unsure of what lay beneath. Thomas began the meeting with a succinct summary of the sale process. The acquisition is progressing, but slowly, he said, flipping through a thick binder of documents. The company's leadership is being cautious, which isn't surprising given their financial troubles. They'll want to vet any potential buyers thoroughly. They're stalling, Elena said, her voice cool. They know something's wrong, and they're trying to cover their tracks. Thomas nodded. That's my read too. But if we can present a strong enough case against Harrison and his accomplices, we might be able to force their hand. Arthur cleared his throat, drawing their attention. I've been in touch with a former colleague who still works in accounting, he said. She's scared to come forward, but she confirmed my suspicions. Harrison has been manipulating the books for years, and she believes the CEO is aware of it. Elena's jaw tightened. The CEO? Yes, Arthur said. Lawrence Ashford. I don't have direct proof yet, but if we can access internal communications, emails, meeting records, there's a chance we'll find the connection. Elena leaned forward, her eyes locked on Arthur. And can your contact get us that access? Arthur hesitated. It's risky. If she's caught, she could lose her job or worse. Elena's expression softened, but her resolve didn't waver. Tell her she won't be left hanging. If she helps us, I'll make sure she's protected, financially, legally, whatever it takes. Arthur nodded, relief flickering across his face. I'll let her know. As the meeting wrapped up, Elena lingered by the windows, staring out at the city. Thomas approached her, his hands in his pockets. You're taking a big risk here, he said quietly. Elena glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I didn't get here by playing it safe, Thomas. He chuckled softly. Fair enough, but this isn't just about money or business. If Harrison and the CEO are involved in something illegal, they won't go down without a fight. Are you ready for that? Elena's smile faded, replaced by a steely determination. I've spent my entire life fighting, Thomas. For respect, for opportunities, for a seat at the table. This isn't any different. And if they think they intimidate me, they're about to learn how wrong they are. Thomas studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'll make sure we're prepared for whatever comes next. That evening, as Elena reviewed the latest documents at home, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered anyway. MS. Morgan, a gruff voice said on the other end. This is Victor Harrison. I believe we need to talk. Elena's heart skipped a beat, but her voice remained steady. Mr. Harrison, to what do I owe the pleasure? I've been informed of your interest in acquiring the Four Seasons, Harrison said, his tone dripping with thinly veiled hostility. I wanted to personally assure you that such a transaction would not be in your best interest. Elena's grip on her phone tightened. Is that so? And why is that? Let's just say the hotel industry is complicated, Harrison replied. It would be a shame if your reputation were to suffer because of a poorly considered investment. Elena's eyes narrowed. Was that a threat, Mr. Harrison? A friendly warning, he said smoothly. Think it over. The line went dead, leaving Elena staring at her phone. She set it down carefully, her jaw clenched. Harrison had just made his first move and, in doing so, confirmed everything Arthur had said. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. If Harrison wanted a fight, he was going to get one. And when she was finished, the Four Seasons wouldn't just be hers. It would be the foundation of a legacy he couldn't tarnish. With renewed determination, Elena picked up the phone and dialed Arthur. It's time to move, she said when he answered. Tell your contact we need those records now. The fight had officially begun. The next morning, Elena awoke with a strange mix of calm and resolve. Victor Harrison's veiled threat from the previous evening played in her mind like a sinister echo, but rather than unnerving her, It sharpened her focus. She had spent too much of her life navigating obstacles placed in her path by men like Harrison, men who underestimated her resolve simply because she didn't fit their preconceived mold. Her first task of the day was to set up a secure line of communication with Arthur and his contact inside the Four Seasons. Trusting Arthur was still a calculated risk, but Elena had learned that progress often required walking a fine line between caution and boldness. Downstairs, Rachel G. had already turned the dining table into an impromptu war room. Papers, laptops, and sticky notes were scattered in a controlled chaos only she could decipher. A large whiteboard stood propped against the wall, filled with timelines and connections drawn in thick marker lines. "Morning," Rachel G. greeted, barely looking up as she jotted something on a notepad. "Coffee's on the counter." Elena poured herself a cup and joined her at the table. "What's the latest?" Rachel G. handed her a printed report. "Arthur's contact came through late last night. These are the first batch of emails she managed to pull. Internal communications between Harrison and the CEO, Lawrence Ashford." Elena scanned the pages, her eyes narrowing as the pieces began to align. The emails were carefully worded but hinted at deliberate manipulation of financial records. One in particular stood out. "Ensure the adjustments to the quarterly reports are finalized by Friday. I don't want any questions from the board." Elena tapped the line with her finger. "This is it. They're actively hiding losses." Rachel G. nodded. "It gets worse. Look at the last page." Elena flipped to the final page and froze. It was an internal memo from Ashford to Harrison discussing plans to offload smaller properties within the chain to shell companies owned by Harrison's associates. The scheme was clear: undervalue the assets, sell them at a loss, and funnel the profits into private accounts. "They're gutting the company from the inside," Elena murmured, her voice low but firm. Rachel G. looked grim. "And using the sale as a way to cover their tracks. If this doesn't come to light soon, they'll walk away with millions, and you'll inherit a sinking ship." Elena set the papers down and leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "We need to expose this, but timing is everything. If we go public now, they'll bury the evidence and spin it as an attack from an outsider." Rachel G. tilted her head. "What if we make them feel the heat from within first?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "If we leak just enough to the board anonymously, they'll start asking questions. Harrison and Ashford will scramble to control the narrative, which might force them to make mistakes. Meanwhile, we gather more evidence to solidify our case." Elena considered the idea. It was bold, risky, but potentially effective. "And Arthur's contact? She's willing to keep digging," Rachel G. said, "but she's scared. We need to reassure her." Elena nodded. "Reach out to her. Let her know we'll protect her no matter what. And draft an anonymous memo for the board, something that highlights the discrepancies without giving away too much." Rachel G. grinned. On it. By midday, the anonymous memo had been sent. Within hours, whispers of discontent began circulating among the Four Seasons board members. Elena's sources confirmed that a few key members had already scheduled a private meeting to discuss the allegations. Meanwhile, Victor Harrison was in damage control mode. He called an emergency meeting with his senior staff, his frustration barely contained as he demanded to know who had leaked the information. His confident veneer was beginning to crack. Lawrence Ashford, the CEO, wasn't faring much better. Known for his icy composure, he was uncharacteristically curt in his responses during a conference call with investors. The sudden scrutiny had unsettled him, and it showed. That evening, Arthur called Elena with unexpected news. "I just heard from my contact," he said. "Harrison is planning a last-minute trip to the Cayman Islands tomorrow." Elena's heart quickened. "The Caymans? Why?" "Probably to secure funds or transfer assets before things get worse," Arthur speculated. "It's a classic move. Hide the money before anyone can trace it." Elena's mind raced. If Harrison was moving funds, there would be records, bank transactions, wire transfers, breadcrumbs that could lead to the full extent of the corruption. "We need someone to intercept those records," Elena said. "Do you think your contact can access them?" Arthur hesitated. "I can ask, but it's risky. She's already on thin ice." Elena's jaw tightened. "We can't let this opportunity slip through our fingers. Tell her to proceed, but only if she feels safe." "And Arthur?" "Yes. Make sure she knows she's not alone in this. I'll have my legal team on standby if anything goes wrong." That night, as Elena sat alone in her study, She reflected on how far she had come. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but she could feel the momentum shifting. Harrison and Ashford were no longer untouchable. The cracks in their facade were widening, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. She glanced at the folder of documents on her desk, the evidence painstakingly gathered over weeks of effort. This wasn't just about taking down two corrupt men. It was about proving that justice could prevail, even in a world that often seemed tilted in favor of the powerful. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel G. Memo reached the board. They're rattled. Next move. Elena's reply was swift. Keep the pressure on. We're just getting started. As she set the phone down, a faint smile played on her lips. The game was far from over, but for the first time, she felt the odds tipping in her favor. And when the dust finally settled, the Four Seasons wouldn't just belong to her. It would be reborn under her vision, a symbol of integrity and excellence. But first, she had to dismantle the empire of lies holding it together, one calculated move at a time. The following morning, Elena found herself back in the quiet cafe where she had first met Arthur. The air inside was warm, a contrast to the biting cold just outside the frosted windows. She sat at the same corner table, waiting for Arthur's contact to arrive. This wasn't a meeting she could leave to intermediaries. The stakes were too high, and trust was fragile. The woman entered a few minutes later, glancing around nervously before spotting Elena. Her petite frame was bundled in an oversized coat, and her shoulders were tense, as though bracing against an unseen weight. Elena stood to greet her, offering a warm, reassuring smile. "Thank you for coming," Elena said, gesturing for her to sit. The woman hesitated but eventually slid into the chair across from her. "I don't have much time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If anyone finds out I'm here." "They won't," Elena said firmly, leaning in slightly. "You're safe with me. I promise." The woman nodded, her hands trembling as she reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "This has everything I could find. Emails, financial records, transaction histories. It's not complete, but it's enough to show the scope of what Harrison and Ashford have been doing." Elena took the flash drive, her fingers brushing against the woman's cold hands. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The woman hesitated, then whispered, "Linda May." "Well, Linda, you've done something incredibly brave," Elena said, her tone steady. "I can't promise this will be easy, but I can promise you won't face it alone. My team will protect you every step of the way." Linda nodded, though the fear in her eyes remained. "Just make sure they don't get away with it." Elena's gaze hardened. "They won't." Back at her brownstone, Elena handed the flash drive to Rachel G., who immediately began decrypting its contents. The small study they had turned into a makeshift command center hummed with activity as Rachel G. worked, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Elena paced the room, her mind racing with possibilities. If the data Linda provided was as damning as promised, it could tip the scales entirely. But with that power came risk. Harrison and Ashford wouldn't go down quietly. "Got it," Rachel G. said finally, breaking the silence. "Take a look at this." Elena leaned over her shoulder, scanning the screen. The files were meticulous. Linda had pulled detailed records of fraudulent transactions, complete with timestamps and account numbers. One document stood out, an email exchange between Harrison and Ashford discussing the sale of a prime property in Miami at a fraction of its market value. "They're laundering money through property sales," Elena said, her voice cold, "and using shell companies to hide the profits." Rachel G. nodded. "It's all here. Enough to trigger a full investigation if we leak this to the right people." Elena straightened, her expression resolute. "Not yet. If we go public now, they'll claim it's a smear campaign. We need something they can't refute, something that forces them to admit guilt." The next step was to disrupt Harrison's trip to the Cayman Islands. Elena contacted Thomas and outlined her plan. It was risky, but if executed correctly, it could expose the extent of Harrison's corruption and accelerate the board's growing distrust. "Are you sure about this?" Thomas asked, his tone cautious. "Absolutely," Elena replied. "We can't afford to wait for them to make the next move. We need to take control of the narrative." Thomas sighed but agreed. "I'll coordinate with my contacts on the ground. If Harrison makes any significant transactions while he's there, we'll know." 2 days later, Elena sat in her study, her phone on speaker as Thomas's voice crackled through the line. "We've got him," he said. "Harrison transferred $3 million to an offshore account this morning. The transaction was flagged by one of my contacts in the financial sector. Elena's lips curled into a faint smile. That's the thread we needed. Pull it. Thomas chuckled softly. Already in motion. Once this hits the board, there's no way they'll stand behind him. Elena ended the call and leaned back in her chair, a sense of satisfaction washing over her. Harrison had underestimated her resolve, and now he was about to pay the price. The board meeting took place the following day, and though Elena wasn't present, her influence was felt. Thomas had ensured that the evidence of Harrison's offshore dealings was delivered to each board member before the meeting. The room buzzed with tension as the members confronted Harrison, who tried desperately to explain away the damning transactions. "This is absurd," Harrison protested, his face flushed with anger. "These allegations are baseless. Someone is trying to sabotage me." But the evidence was irrefutable. Transaction records, email correspondence, and Linda's meticulous documentation painted a clear picture of his involvement in the scheme. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that Harrison's support among the board was crumbling. Lawrence Ashford, ever the opportunist, attempted to distance himself. "I had no knowledge of these activities," he claimed, his tone measured. "If Harrison acted improperly, it was without my authorization." Elena watched the live updates from Rachel G., her smile growing as she saw the cracks in their alliance deepen. Harrison and Ashford were turning on each other, and it was only a matter of time before their empire of lies collapsed entirely. That evening, Elena sat alone in her living room, the flicker of the fireplace casting warm light across the room. She held a glass of wine in her hand, the weight of the day settling over her. The fight was far from over. Ashford was still in power, and Harrison hadn't faced formal charges yet. But the tide was turning. Her phone buzzed with a message from Linda. "Thank you for believing me." Elena smiled softly, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about taking down Harrison and Ashford anymore. It was about setting a precedent, proving that justice could prevail even in the face of systemic corruption. She set the glass down and picked up her phone, dialing Thomas. When he answered, she didn't waste any time. "Prepare the next phase," she said. "We're not stopping until this is finished." And as the night deepened, Elena felt a quiet certainty. The foundation of the Four Seasons was cracking, and soon it would be hers to rebuild. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Elena's brownstone, but the warmth of the sun did little to ease the tension that hung in the air. The house was alive with movement. Rachel G. hunched over her laptop at the dining table, Thomas on a conference call in the study, and Elena pacing the living room, her phone in hand. Linda May's message had come through late in the night. "Harrison knows someone's digging. He's looking for me." Elena reread the text, her grip tightening on the device. Harrison was desperate, and desperate men made reckless choices. This wasn't just about protecting Linda anymore. It was about ensuring the entire operation didn't unravel before they had all the pieces in place. Rachel G. appeared in the doorway, her glasses perched on her nose and a tablet clutched to her chest. "We've got a problem," she said, her voice low but urgent. Elena stopped pacing and turned to face her. "What now?" "Harrison has initiated a full-scale audit at the New York property," Rachel G. said. "He's using it as an excuse to interrogate staff. If Linda's name comes up." Elena's jaw tightened. "We can't let that happen." "What about the legal team? Can we secure a protective order?" Rachel G. shook her head. "Not without tipping our hand. If Harrison finds out we're behind the leaks, he'll go nuclear." Elena inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "Then we need to move faster." "What about the board? Are they still pressuring Ashford?" "Big time," Rachel G. said, a small smile breaking through her concern. "The board's calling for an emergency session tomorrow to vote on suspending Harrison pending an investigation." Elena's eyes narrowed. "That's not enough. If Ashford survives this, he'll find someone else to do his dirty work." Rachel G. nodded. "Which is why I've been working on something else." She tapped on her tablet and turned the screen toward Elena. "This is a draft of a press release. If the board drags its feet, we leak the full story to the media. Every email, every transaction. Public pressure will force their hand." Elena took the tablet, scanning the draft. The words were carefully chosen, framing the corruption as a betrayal of the brand's values and an affront to its employees and guests. It was bold, dangerous even, but it could work. Later that day, Elena arranged to meet Linda in a discreet location, a quiet park on the edge of the city where the bare trees offered a semblance of privacy. Linda arrived bundled in her coat, her eyes darting nervously as she approached. Elena greeted her with a reassuring smile, gesturing to a bench beneath an old oak tree. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know how difficult this is." Linda sat down, clutching her bag tightly. "It's not just me," she said, her voice trembling. "Harrison has started questioning everyone. My colleagues are scared, and I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Elena placed a hand on her arm, her touch firm but gentle. "Listen to me. You've done more than enough already. If you want to step back, I'll understand. But if you're willing to stay the course, I promise you, we're almost there. Harrison and Ashford are on the brink of losing everything." Linda hesitated, her gaze searching Elena's face. "Do you really think they'll face justice?" Elena's eyes hardened. "I don't think. I know." After a long pause, Linda nodded. "Just tell me what you need." Elena's expression softened. "Right now, we need to protect you. Rachel G. will arrange for legal counsel in case Harrison tries to retaliate. And once this is over, you'll have my full support, financial, legal, whatever you need." Linda's shoulders relaxed slightly, and for the first time, a flicker of hope crossed her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. Elena gave her arm a reassuring squeeze. "No, Linda. Thank you. You're the reason this is possible." That evening, Elena received an urgent call from Thomas. His tone was grave. "Harrison just tried to transfer another $5 million to an offshore account," he said. "This time, it was flagged immediately by the bank's compliance department. They've frozen the transaction." Elena's brow furrowed. "Does he know?" "Not yet," Thomas replied, "but he will soon. And when he does, he'll realize the walls are closing in." Elena leaned against her desk, her mind racing. "This is it then. We need to act before he has a chance to retaliate." Thomas hesitated. "There's something else. The board has decided to move up their meeting to tonight. They're voting on whether to suspend Harrison and whether to investigate Ashford." Elena's heart quickened. "And if they vote against?" Thomas's voice was steady but firm. "Then we go public." The board meeting began late that night in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of the Four Seasons headquarters. The tension was palpable as the members gathered, their expressions a mixture of determination and unease. Victor Harrison sat at one end of the table, his face pale but defiant. Lawrence Ashford occupied the chair beside him, his usual composure replaced by a quiet, simmering anger. The chair of the board, an older woman with piercing blue eyes, called the meeting to order. "We're here to discuss the allegations brought against Mr. Harrison and the potential implications for Mr. Ashford's leadership." The presentation of evidence was damning. The board reviewed the documents Elena had strategically provided, each piece painting a clearer picture of the corruption within the company. "This is ridiculous," Harrison snapped, his voice rising. "These documents are fabricated. It's a smear campaign orchestrated by someone trying to undermine us." "And the $5 million transfer flagged by the bank this afternoon?" the chair asked coolly. "Was that fabricated too?" Harrison faltered, his jaw tightening. Ashford remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table. The chair let the silence stretch before speaking again. "We'll proceed to a vote. All in favor of suspending Mr. Harrison and launching a full investigation into Mr. Ashford's involvement." Hands rose around the table, one by one. The decision was unanimous. Hours later, Elena sat in her study, watching the live feed of a news broadcast. The anchors were discussing the breaking story. Scandal rocks Four Seasons. Top executives under investigation for fraud and corruption. Rachel G. sat beside her, a satisfied smile on her face. "We did it." Elena leaned back, exhaling deeply. "We're not done yet. Harrison and Ashford might be out, but the damage they've done will take time to repair." Rachel G. nodded. "But it's your name on the purchase agreement now. The Four Seasons is officially yours." Elena's gaze lingered on the screen, her mind already shifting to the future. She had won the battle, but the real work was just beginning. And this time, she wouldn't just rebuild the Four Seasons, she would redefine it. The announcement of Elena Morgan's acquisition of the Four Seasons hotel chain sent shockwaves through the industry. The headlines painted her as a visionary, a bold entrepreneur stepping in to salvage the legacy of a once revered brand tarnished by scandal. But for Elena, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about the promise she had made to herself, to rebuild not just the company, but everything it stood for. The following week, Elena walked through the gilded lobby of the Four Seasons New York for the first time as its owner. The air was charged with a mix of anticipation and unease as staff members paused their tasks to watch her pass. Some recognized her from the day she was dismissed at the front desk. Others had only heard whispers about the new boss who had toppled Victor Harrison. Elena stopped in the center of the lobby, her sharp gaze sweeping over the familiar marble floors and towering columns. The space still radiated opulence, but it felt hollow, a facade hiding years of exploitation and corruption. She turned to Rachel G., who stood at her side with a clipboard in hand. "Gather everyone," Elena said. "Staff meeting now, in the ballroom." The entire hotel team assembled. Housekeepers, bellhops, kitchen staff, and managers, all unsure of what to expect. Elena stood at the front of the room, her presence commanding but approachable. "Let me start by saying this. You are not your previous leadership," Elena began, her voice steady. "The actions of Victor Harrison and Lawrence Ashford do not define this hotel or the people who work here. That ends today." She took a breath, letting the weight of her words settle. "I know many of you have been working under fear, under pressure to look the other way while wrongs were committed. That ends today too. From now on, we operate with transparency, integrity, and respect for every single member of this team." The room was silent, but Elena could see the tension in their faces begin to ease. She nodded toward Rachel G., who handed her a stack of envelopes. "These are raises," Elena announced, "for every member of the staff. You've worked hard, and you've been undervalued for far too long. Consider this the first step toward making things right." A ripple of disbelief swept through the room. Staff members exchanged glances, some visibly emotional. Elena smiled faintly. She wasn't just rebuilding a hotel, she was rebuilding trust. While Elena focused on restructuring the chain's internal operations, Rachel G. and Thomas worked tirelessly to finalize the legal cases against Harrison and Ashford. The evidence Linda had provided, combined with the documents intercepted from the Cayman Islands transaction, had been handed over to federal investigators. Within weeks, both men were formally charged with embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. The press devoured the story, painting Harrison and Ashford as symbols of corporate greed. But Elena refused to gloat. In interviews, she deflected the focus from their downfall to her vision for the Four Seasons. "This isn't about two corrupt executives," she told the New York Times. "This is about reclaiming what this brand was meant to be. A place where excellence isn't just about luxury, but about integrity and inclusivity." Elena kept her promise to Linda. With Harrison and Ashford out of the picture, Linda was reinstated as an accounting manager, this time with full protections and the freedom to implement better oversight measures. At Elena's insistence, Linda also received a substantial bonus as a gesture of gratitude. During one of their meetings, Linda hesitated before speaking. "I never thought. I never believed people like you existed in this industry." Elena smiled warmly. "Neither did I. That's why we have to change it." Months later, the Four Seasons was thriving under Elena's leadership. She had implemented diversity and inclusion programs across all locations, partnered with nonprofit organizations to provide hospitality training for underrepresented communities, and introduced policies to ensure all staff were treated with respect and fairness. The penthouse suite in the New York location, where Elena had once been denied entry, became a symbol of her journey. It was redesigned as the Legacy Suite, with a plaque in the entryway that read, "A reminder that excellence knows no bounds." One evening, as Elena was reviewing reports in her office, she received an unexpected visitor. Victor Harrison, free on bail but disgraced and unemployed, stood at the door. His once pristine suit was wrinkled, his face lined with exhaustion. "I assume you're here to apologize," Elena said without looking up. Harrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I made mistakes," he said, "and I underestimated you." Elena finally met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "You didn't underestimate me, Victor. You underestimated the strength of everyone you exploited, dismissed, and underestimated. I'm just the one who made sure they were heard." He opened his mouth to respond, but Elena raised a hand to stop him. "Goodbye, Victor. I hope you learned something from this." He left without another word. A year later, Elena stood in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons New York, now fully restored to its former glory. The room was filled with staff, partners, and guests celebrating the chain's rebirth. Elena raised a glass, her voice steady and confident as she addressed the crowd. "This isn't just a victory for me," she said. "It's a victory for every person who was told they didn't belong, for every worker who was overlooked, for every guest who was judged unfairly. This is proof that justice can prevail, and that dignity is, and always will be, the best revenge." The room erupted into applause, but Elena felt a quiet satisfaction in her heart. She had reclaimed more than a hotel. She had reclaimed a legacy, and this time it would be built to last.